RealTuners Radio.
What's up, everyone, and welcome to RealTuners Radio, episode 31. We appreciate you tuning in. Tonight's guest is Jeff Stacy from Aeromotive. We also have our usual panel of hosts taking tech questions from you, covering all things automotive, including but not limited to Chris Delgado from ProSpeed, Chad Spire Racing Heads, John Bewley, Little John's Motorsport Solutions, Tom Sewell from Fuel Injector Development, James Short, Shore Tuning, Mark Dahlquist, Throttles Performance, Bill Fowler, Bear Brakes, Doug and Andy Cook from Motion Raceworks, Scott Evans with Evans Tuning, and me, the guy you're not really sure what exactly it is I bring to the table, Rye Clem from Bull City Speed, and finally, the man keeping this train wreck on the rails, Scott Clark, RealTuners.
All right, listen up. Are you interested in taking a live in-person class with RealTuners? We have 2-day courses in dyno shops across the country. Our first class of 2018 will be in Houston, Texas on January 20th and 21st, which is literally 3 days away. There are 3 seats left for this small 20-person class. Attention for you folks down in the Southeast. In 3 weeks, we are having a 2-day class in Melbourne, Florida at Trick Pro Motorsports. There are 8 seats left for this class. Message us on Facebook at RealTuners LLC. If you have a group of 2 or more, we'll give you a discount. For more info or to make a reservation, go to RealTuners.com or message us at RealTuners LLC on Facebook. Learn how to tune your own standalone EFI system like Holley, Big Stuff 3, Megasquirt, or Microsquirt on the chassis dyno. Includes topics such as traction control, individual cylinder tuning on a budget, and power adders. All designed to help you get your project running successfully, and a course taught by people who've actually done this stuff for a living. All right. Good evening, everyone. January 17th, 2018. This is RealTuners Radio, episode 31. How's everybody doing tonight? I think my guys are on board here. Hey, man. Everybody's there's no excuses. You got to be back to work. Everything, the season's kicked back in. I'm busy. Everybody's busy again. Is that true? General consensus?
Yeah, pretty much.
Right on. So.
Yes.
Oh, no, I didn't want to interrupt if anyone had a story to tell.
I was just going to say it's starting to ramp back up like normal.
Yep. Same here. I was just telling the guys I've done 2 days of a number of hours of remote tunes. Keeping busy right off the bat, which is good.
Well, I just got my W-2, so about to be balling here real soon.
We're going to help him spend his money.
Yeah, for sure.
Cheap bastard. You're not going to spend any money.
Probably not.
Pre-spent.
It's already gone. So, hey, okay, I don't know if anybody else, I realize that there's not a lot of people privy to all this info. I don't really see it going out across the internet much. They're keeping it quiet, but huge props to Andy Frost, the guy in the UK, Shane Tecklenburg, his American tuner. Those guys are in Bahrain right now running his street car, his car that passed an MOT test in the UK, which is apparently a pretty tough, pretty serious deal. Anyway, those guys went a 603 with a 6 at 245.5 mile an hour in that car that's passed an MOT test. It's got defrost and everything. It's pretty hilarious. You should read up on what you have to do to pass an MOT. I thought it was kind of interesting. He doesn't have to do drag week, so it's not the grueling. I'm sure there's still parts of it that are grueling, but they didn't have to do the drag week thing. Over here, it's kind of expected of you to claim that status or whatever. Like Larry Larson and those guys have all the unlimited class guys that did drag week. They're generally considered the ones that set the records over here. But anyway, I thought that was pretty cool to watch them. He has a 5-second full member club. I think you can buy into this. I don't think it's that big of a deal, but they've got a whole bunch of live video streams and stuff going. I got in that group, and it was really entertaining to watch. They've got
He's
guys
trying to go for the record, right? He's
trying to go like 580 something.
and that's to knock off Lutz, right?
Lutz or Larson. I think Lutz 586 or something, and Larry like a 588.
Yeah.
And we're talking quarter mile 580.
Quarter miles. Yep.
Mile
Yeah.
580.
Pro mod
Just
speeds.
making sure that people know.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's so. I mean, that's pretty legit. They got a neat facility to do it at, and that car. It's fun to watch. It's interesting. You can tell Shane's got the power
week or
tuned.
no drag week. If it's got license plates on it, it's still pretty cool. You know, like Larson didn't run 5s at drag week. Even
No.
though things been on drag week, but still.
Well, the reason for that, the track. They didn't have a really good track on drag week. He didn't, and the car. I mean, probably the car wasn't ready either. I don't know, but
Yeah, I'm not trying to take anything away from anybody.
no,
580s,
yeah, just different
5s,
situations.
4 mile.
Do what you can with
with-
what you got.
Yeah, 5s and keeping it somewhat street legal is badass no matter how you cut it.
Right.
So, other things you want to talk about real quick? Sad news in drag racing with Englishtown
Ugh.
closing. It sucks.
No, go ahead, man. Tell them the story for the people that haven't.
So-
Most people know this already, especially if
Yeah,
you're an
Englishtown
NHRA guy.
Dragway up in New Jersey, you know, that track's been running since the 1960s, and they just out of nowhere, effective immediately, put out a press release saying that they are closing down the quarter mile. They're closing down the drag strip. They're going to keep the facility open, which just doesn't make sense to me. Like, it sounds like they're just turning it into a fairgrounds because they say it's going to continue to operate as a swap meet, car shows, monster trucks, motocross, all this other stuff. Pretty much everything except drag racing. So I don't know. I didn't
They
catch
probably make a
what the
whole
reason
lot
they
more
shut it
money
down
being
for,
a
but
fairgrounds than they
it
do
just
everything
sucks.
else.
But yeah, I'm assuming it's probably somebody, you know, the track's been there since the 60s, and somebody built a house there in, you know, the 2000s and was like, oh, this is annoying, and started petitioning. And
Englishtown's been fighting that for years, though. They've always been fighting the people that have built up around the track, and I guess they finally just got to the point where they didn't want to mess with it. Also, word is that Copart has leased the track facility, the area, the grounds around the drag strip itself for basically wrecked car storage.
that's so lame. It's like the worst reason ever. Yeah, yeah. You know, like they went through this with out in California with Fontana. The locals were complaining about the noise there at the Auto Club Speedway, and that facility is massive. And they're complaining about the drag strip, and they wanted to put a sound wall up, but they still did the road course and everything else. And everybody thought it was done, but a few years later, somebody finally got the funds together and they put the sound wall up, and they opened that track back up. So maybe there's hope in the future that it'll open back up. It'd be sad to see that go. It's not good for the sport any way, shape, or form whenever we lose a track. So
No, I saw that post, and the first people to talk about that was Bang Shift. Brian Loans put an article up about it yesterday midday, and people were like, fake news. Well, the first thing I did was I checked on the NHRA schedule, and it still had Summer Nats in Englishtown. And I'm like, what? And Mark Cicino, a guy from Drag Week, he posted it up. Shout out to that guy. He's super cool. He's got the Ponte Car logo. That guy's such a hard time. It's such a cool car. But anyway, he posted it up, and I'm just like, oh, okay. I replied, well, Summer Nats still show on the NHRA calendar or whatever. And then Brian Loans messaged me. He's been on the show. It's probably been 10 episodes ago. But he messaged me, and I'm like, well, dude, call me if you have a second. And he called me, and he's like, yeah, they started telling the staff. So it's pretty much, and he's a staffer there. He's been a house announcer for a long time. One of the announcers there. And I guess they told the staff, and they said, well, the NHRA will announce it in the morning. And he was right. And they scooped everybody too. They were reporting it before everybody else that I saw. But so I guess
they're working on the 4-wide track here in Vegas right now.
Saw that. There's some good news.
So it's going to be awesome.
Hopefully.
Yeah, I saw the time lapse video that they put out of them laying the concrete down. Is really cool.
Oh yeah.
They were trying to shut down. I've heard grumblings they're going to try and shut down Pomona, which Pomona is only used twice a year, and that's all they do. Literally, is just
They use the
nationals,
fairgrounds
that
for a lot of
track.
other stuff though too. They have cool.
Yeah, they use the
stuff there.
fairgrounds, but that track never goes hot except 2 times a year.
Yeah,
That's it.
and that's really got to piss people off.
NHRA
It's so
actually
loud.
draws a huge amount of money there. That's one of the
Right.
places where it's like massive.
Is it? Yeah. I've been to one. I've been to once in the when it was in 2007, I guess, when I worked out there. I did 2 years out in Southern California on a contract job. But and we were, the company I worked for advertised with the magazines, and so we got to go hang out in Prime Media or whatever they were, Source Interlink at the time. We got to hang out in there. They got a what is it, a condo thing that up over the starting line or whatever. It's pretty cool in the tower. It was really nice, catered food and stuff. I thought that was pretty cool. But that was the only time I've seen an event there. But I've been to a couple of other functions that they hold in the fairgrounds. It's beautiful. It's like damn Disney World there. You know,
Yeah,
it's
the
really
fairgrounds are awesome.
gorgeous
For
property. Yeah.
Grand National Roadster Show, LA Roadster Show, whatever you want to call it. And
Yeah.
the NHRA museum there. But yeah, it's a bummer across the board. It's just kind of sucks. So
Yeah, losing E-Town is I should be playing some rest in peace music if I had my stuff together.
But yeah, that was a big thing that popped up on my radar this week.
So we have a good group on tonight. We got Tom Vigue's on. I see he signed in. Welcome, Tom.
Hello.
All right, he made it. Cool. Andy is here from Motion Raceworks. Got a motion representative. Those guys are busy as crap right now. I've been following them on Facebook. Garrett Jacobson is on here tonight. So I don't know. You don't even have to unmute yourself, Garrett. I'll talk for you. But Garrett just sent us a picture. He is currently cruising at, where did that picture go? 32,999 feet. Outside air temperature of minus 67 degrees. He's logged into our chat with over the go-go internet on the airplane. Basically, he's flying home from Arizona to back to Minneapolis, then back to Northern Iowa. Anyway, so Garrett is an instructor at NIAC, Northern Iowa Area Community College, which is a huge community college here in Iowa where I live. And we've done some classes up there. He also has a performance business that he runs on the side, tuned by Garrett. And you follow him, Garrett Jacobson, on Facebook. He's got all kinds of cool stuff he works on. He works on some of the roundy round stuff that does EFI. The Ecotech motors that these guys are racing, kind of cool stuff there. But anyway, welcome aboard. If he wants to talk, he can talk later. But I got Little John once again, getting all loud. How's it going, JB?
Oh man, just another day.
Right on. And
Another day above ground.
Yeah. Yeah, God, knock on wood. What a bright outlook you have. Rye Clemp, obviously.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, whatever. Our pre-recorded interviews. Just want to make sure or pre-recorded bumpers, whatever you call them. Want to make sure he's actually on here. Scotty out in Vegas talking about the 55-degree cold day it was today.
60 actually right now.
Suck it. No, it got up to like 19 here, and it was heat wave. Dude, it was like the high was like 24 hours ago.
Everybody
yesterday.
was sweating their ass off in Iowa.
Yeah, right? Minus 23 last week. Holy
Man, I saw you had that little brief power outage and you had to go out in the cold and try to start up your generator.
Hour and 15 minutes. Well, the baby, there's two, I got a 3,500 watt one, which isn't huge, but it's enough to run the little temporary electric heater, a couple other little things to heat a couple of rooms, but didn't have to do that. I basically had to go out there, and as soon as I went out, lit the Coleman lantern out in the garage that I got on standby. That plan worked. But I have a kerosene heater that was out in my shop. I didn't have it ready. I didn't have any fresh wick in it. It's all dusty. It'll be nasty. So I was like, man, I got to get the electric heater going and just heat up the upstairs or whatever. Because it's me and the girlfriend and the dog. Whatever. We can cuddle up. Whatever. So I'm getting ready to do this. And literally, like, as soon as I turn on the fuel line for the generator, the lights came on in the garage. And so I just sat there for a minute. I'm like, is it going to stay on? Is it going to go out? It's going to stay on? Because it had been in like an hour and 15 minutes. And I was actually on a remote with a guy who's coming to the class this weekend trying to get his car going. And I just like had to cut him off. Although I'll give Verizon credit, it stayed working. But anyway, that was my adventure. Sorry, I'm rambling on. Let's see. Mark Dahlquist. Dahlquist is back. So Mark spent 9 days in the hospital with a bunch of BS. Mark, don't give us the details you were given earlier. Just 9 days with getting your gallbladder stuff worked on.
All I know is it's 31 degrees here in Fargo, North Dakota.
That's a heat wave.
That's like middle of July normal temperature, right?
This is nice. Even my dog wants to go back outside.
You ought to come to North Carolina where we got a whopping 2 inches of snow and the state shut down.
Yeah, so Tom's from up in the Northeast, so he's used to like 8 feet of snow. I'm sure you're laughing at those people trying to drive. Yeah, on average.
Yeah, you're on the other side of the state for me, Tom. It's just starting here. I'm out on the coast.
Oh, okay, yeah, we got a good 2 or 3 inches, but there's no bread, no milk. We're doomed.
That had to be so entertaining.
No milk sandwiches?
Milk sandwiches for everybody.
Holy crap. And then Chris Delgado finally is on here. It's his last week of babysitting the girls.
Yep.
He had a diaper thing he had to handle just before we went live. It was pretty funny. Daddy, poopy! So anyway, man, we should now, our guest tonight, Rye, you don't know, I should introduce our guest. I know him better than any of us, I think. He's,
yes, please.
So this guy, he's from Kansas City, and I met him when I was assisting with Larry Larson's truck before Drag Week 2014, and Jeff was, provided a bunch of parts and expertise on fluid transfer, cooling, fuel systems, that kind of stuff. And at the time, well, let's see. I'm not sure what the timeline is, but he recently went to work for Aeromotive. He's a vice president now at Aeromotive. And just talking to him, he's up to speed on the tech pretty darn good. He was knocking out questions in our Facebook group here a little bit ago. So I'm going to ring him up here in just a minute. But anyway, so Jeff, he's also co-pilot. I call him the co-pilot for Larry Larson. He's like, I'm not sure what to call me, but I guess not crew chief, whatever. He bosses us around pretty good, and the dude works his butt off helping with that program. He's traveled with Larry to all of these recent No Prep events that they've done, and Jeff also is involved with No Prep Nation, the Facebook, the stuff that comes off Facebook for Larson race cars. A lot of times Jeff does all the update videos and posts and all that stuff. But anyway, so it's good to have him aboard. I'll just go ahead and say hello. We've got him on the line. Jeff, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can't hear you. All I can hear is a bunch of static, Scott.
Why don't I call you back just a second? Doesn't sound like a good connection. Hang on. All right, so we'll try him again. Dun, 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 dun. It's going to be one of those days.
Yeah, off to a great start, ladies and gentlemen.
Probably this thing here. Yeah, okay.
Now it's perfect.
Much better. Yeah, that's you can't plug this stupid thing in. The power
toggle A must not have been.
Yeah, it's a operator error. So anyway, I just gave you the grand introduction, but you probably didn't get to hear any of it.
No.
Well, I explained that I knew you from the little bit of stuff, work I did with Larry's project in 2014, and that you were kind of a large influence on the fluid transfer, cooling, fuel systems, which was kind of complicated on that truck and had to work right and did. And then later, now that you're a vice president at Aeromotive, and I was explaining that it seemed like you have a lot of the fuel system tech covered. So that's a good thing. You were knocking out questions already today on the Facebook page.
That's the one thing about Aeromotive. Everybody that works there is fairly knowledgeable about what we try and sell. And, whether it's the owner of the company or whether, it's a tech guy, we feel it's extremely important to have a pretty basic knowledge of what you're trying to sell, what you're making, just because today's fuel systems can get so technical, and with all the different power adders and all the different fuels, there are so many applications, and there's a lot of experts out there on the interweb and
that aren't getting it right. There's a lot of people having problems. I know that. We see a lot of complaints, but
and most of the problems, everybody out there that's an American manufacturer that's building fuel systems, in my opinion, does a great job. What we don't anticipate is some of the applications where a product is being used, and that's where a guy runs into a problem. I mean, we spend a tremendous amount of money engineering systems, and that's why we're Aeromotive Fuel Systems, not Aeromotive Fuel Components,
Pumps.
is because we try and build a system that solves a problem.
Yeah.
And you always get, 3 or 4 guys a year that, have an engineering degree from, a Cheerios box. And, just because we tell you to put a -10 inlet on it, there's no reason a -4 inlet shouldn't work. And, then they get on the internet and tell everybody how stupid we are and why their pump burn up. And
now you're talking to industry guys. Every one of us is chuckling. I guarantee 3/4 of us on here like, yeah, we get that guy too.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think he calls every company out.
Yeah. So anyway, no, I mean, it's good to have you. Welcome aboard. We got all the time you need. We'll have people just popping out questions here pretty soon, but I don't know. Dahlquist, do you want to kick it off?
Actually, that's what we were talking about before the show. I was saying, I happen to like to eat Tide packets. What fuel pump do I need? What size inlet hose? What size inlet hose should I get?
Right.
I can't afford the Tide packets. So I have to go off-brand.
Just eat the powder. Somebody said there. So no, you just started with Tide packets. Yeah.
HC Buddy brand.
Yeah. So, Mark, why don't we start with some guys had some light tech questions. Kick it down there. I don't know, see what some of them.
The first one that I saw, if I scroll. Oh,
did you lose it?
Sorry. Yeah, I lost it a little bit. If the first one I saw was there was a guy that was having problems with cold start, and one of his issues, he's got a Megasquirt. One of the issues is his O2 sensor doesn't come up for the first 30 seconds. But I don't really think that that's all that important for getting cold start right, because pretty much it's almost by feel and by ear. But he said he's having long crank times and everything. And the first thing I said is find that temperature and maybe add a little bit of cranking fuel to help it out.
He should go watch that webinar. I mean, there were good run through on the webinar, on the startup webinar. You should watch that. We did a good run through on that. That's worth the $15 or whatever. But yeah, that's I mean, it takes you through making sure that you have good RPM sync, making sure that you have what your base fuel is when it's warm, so that you can go up by a percentage, give you some target percentages. But a lot of times it's a sync issue and not fuel or spark, or maybe he's running too cold of plugs, or his plugs are going to crap. Need some fresh plugs and work on the tune.
Depending on which system, I know like some of the Holley, the TFI stuff takes like a full rotation of going around. It's got to find that number one, so it takes a little longer to actually find on some systems because of how they're set up.
So anyway, now how about one of the questions for Jeff?
Jeff, can you tell us about that new brushless fuel pumps?
Yeah, we had 400 people ask about the brushless fuel pumps.
Yeah, I'm really curious to know what those are capable of and what's the background there.
The brushless stuff is a derivative from our diesel fuel pumps that we did. That was our first foray into a brushless fuel system, because diesel fuel conducts electricity so well. We wanted to get the magnets out of the pumping mechanism and out of the pump, because we actually flow diesel fuel through the pump. So we've had that technology for a couple of years, but we've never brought it to what I would call, the gas side of the market. There's a couple of things that it does really, really well. Control of the motor is one thing. A lot of the people were asking about pulse width modulation on those things, and we have not attempted it yet. Typically, pulse width modulation is used to try and slow the pump down. So during hot times of the year, you're not recycling the fuel as fast and not having like a vapor lock issue on the inlet. Without having the brushes or the brush card in the electric motor, we don't see any introduction of heat like we do on a brush type motor. So that technology there, just from a hot fuel handling issue, enticed us. The torque curve of the brushless motor is way flatter than the brush stuff. So that, of course, got our attention. We bought Waterman Racing Components here a little bit over a year ago, and we were kind of looking at a foray of combining their technology and their spur gear pumps and mating it with some of our electric fuel pump technology. So this is kind of our first endeavor where we've tried to attach the two together.
Waterman is the mechanical fuel pump manufacturer.
Correct. Build everything from a 1.8 gallon a minute pump to 120 gallon a minute pump. All spur gear. Sid started the company about 51 years ago, so he's been around the block a time or two. And they became available. We announced it at PRI 2016, So it was a little bit over a year ago. So the 3.5 gallon and the 5 gallon a minute pump are a derivative of Waterman technology with Aeromotive technology. And we debuted them at SEMA this year and got some raving reviews. I haven't yet to find anybody that has a 5 gallon a minute electric pump. The cool thing about the brushless motor and the electric pump is we keep the amp draw down. The amp draw on that thing at 60 psi is under 25 amps in the electric world. That's not bad.
Where is it being rated for that flow amount? What's the pressure you're rating that at?
43.
Cool.
The cool thing about
that's rocking.
The cool thing about that electric motor is on the old brush stuff, when you put resistance against it, tried to increase fuel pressure, basically, that motor would kind of crap out just because it's old, 100-year-old technology. Really, the brushless stuff is not affected as bad. We don't see a tremendous amount of flow loss at 90 psi. We pretty much have ran one for about 5 months at 90 psi and never shut the thing off. Flow actually starts to increase after about 10 minutes of runtime after the initial startup of the pump, and it takes a good 30 minutes for it to actually break in. We really saw it when we took it to SEMA, and the first day, it was 505, 507. When we would fire it up and let it run. Well, by the third day, it was about 5.1, 5.12 gallons per minute. So it was very interesting as the coatings wore off, as it basically clearanced itself and broke itself in. The performance and the flow improved. Go ahead.
I think a lot of people can kind of relate to this. Like, I used to play with RC cars as a kid, and
sure.
I remember when everything's transitioned over to brushless. So essentially, a lot of the benefits kind of cross over, do they not?
Absolutely. The control you'll have of the electric motor, everybody's been asking about the pulse with modulation, and that will come, but we will use the actual motor controller to do that. We will be able to program it to say run at 30% of maximum RPM or run at 40% or 50%, and we'll be able to toggle that with probably a 1 to 5 volt source, so you could use a TPS to trigger it. So when you're cruising around, going down to Sonic, and you don't need 5 gallons a minute, we can slow the thing way down. We did that on our brush stuff just to be able to control the hot fuel handling issues. The thing we noticed with the brushless motors is without having brushes or the brush card in there, the fuel temperature did not increase nearly as bad as it does with a brush motor, because you're not having to cool that brush card or those brushes. So we ran one of the test pieces for 1,512 hours in the back of the shop during July and August, and we use mineral spirits to flow test everything, because that's pretty close to the same specific gravity of most fuels. And we picked up about 10 degrees of fuel temperature over ambient. So we didn't see, a huge increase of temperature. And we did this only flowing about 5 gallons of mineral spirits. Obviously, if we had a 30-gallon tank of mineral spirits that we were pumping around, the more mineral spirits, the more absorption of the heat you would have. So we took a small container of mineral spirits to try and give it some sort of a realistic test, and we were pleasantly surprised.
With these brushless motors, this stuff, can you overdrive it like with a boosted pump, or are they capable of running on 16 volts? Is there a benefit there of running it on a 16-volt system?
The only real benefit there is they will speed up. Performance is increased with voltage. We test everything at 13.5 volts. So the flow charts and all of the data that we put out is at 13.5. The cool thing about more voltage, typically it's less amperage, which is interesting. So we've had people run these things on some of the 18-volt Makita drill type batteries.
Right.
Haven't had them out long enough to tell you whether they're going to live a long, long time that way, but have not had anybody kill one yet.
I missed this part, but I'm guessing it's a fully positive displacement pump where the more RPM you run it, the more fuel it displaces.
Absolutely. It's a gear type pump, a lot like an oil pump, the way an oil pump is built.
Does it run fairly quietly then? One of the listeners asked if the brushless pumps are any quieter. He's got a different brand pump, but he says it works good, but it's really loud.
The motors have no effect on how loud they are. It's the pumping mechanism that makes all the noise. So to answer your question, no, it's louder than all get out.
Well, and then mounting them. I know Fowler's not on with us tonight, but he got some advice from one of your engineers or somebody, and it's interesting that how you mount them, isolate them, you can dumb down a lot of the noise. But yeah, the one they had on Jake Hashinsky's car that they tested with for a couple of seasons survived Rocky Mountain Race Week and a whole bunch of racing events. And it wasn't super loud. I mean, I've heard much louder.
The definition of loud is all in the person. You know, the guy that's got a Supra with three 340s hanging on a hanger, you know, that never hears a pump turn on. This thing's going to be loud compared to that. But being
brushless, I was going to say, being brushless, does the response time come up as far as demand change?
Yeah, we never measured it compared to a brush style pump. They react pretty fast. I mean, our original design, like our A1000, which is a roller vane style pumping mechanism with a brushed motor, you can pulse modulate them things, and they'll react within a few hundredths of a second, going from, you know, maybe a flow rate of 0.7 of a gallon a minute to 1.5 gallons a minute. So they react fairly fast. A lot of it has to do with wiring, quality of the pump speed controller, or whatever you're pulse modulating it with. There's a lot of factors.
Are these is the brushless stuff safe for all fuels too? Is there any restrictions there?
We haven't blown one up. We haven't figured out any fuel that it doesn't like. Obviously, like I said, we use this in the diesel world. Methanol, ethanol, you know, pump gas, E85, you know, every version of E fuel. We've used this. We're working on some stuff for NASCAR that will be brushless in the fuel cell type technology that runs on E15. And their E15 is a strange fuel. It has all kinds of additives added to it to make it perform.
So I see on the website, looking at your stuff here, you have a brushless A1000 and a brushless Eliminator. Are those the same physical footprint as the brushed style?
Correct.
Are they the same size? Okay, so they're basically a direct swap.
Exactly. The only difference between those and an original A1000 or original Eliminator is the brushless motor.
Gotcha.
And all that is an evolution. We've been making that A1000 pretty much since Steve started the company, you know, 20 some years ago. So that pump started out as a pump that would barely do 0.7 of a gallon a minute. And now at 13.5 volts, you know, we can dang near get 2 gallons a minute out of it. And it's just been technology. Electric motor technology has been, you know, the bulk of it. More efficient pumping mechanisms has increased and helped the flow of that pump also.
So that pump has been the subject of a lot of internet debate back and forth, and we actually have a few people that have asked us, and now that we got the man himself here, how much does that pump support?
Too many variables there. I mean, I can tell you what it flows, but based on what fuel it's pumping, what power adder it has, if it has any power adder, that's always a scary scenario. The guy, you know, asked, will it support 1,000 horsepower naturally aspirated? Absolutely. So, you know, a week later he calls you and says, you know, hey, it won't support it. Well, then you find out that he's, you know, running a freaking 21 gauge wire to it. It's only seeing 10.5 volts, and he's got a -6 inlet line on it, you know, or he's got a 10 micron inlet filter on the inlet side, and that pump's killing itself trying to suck fuel through a restrictive filter. So if you do the basic math, if you know the brake specific fuel consumption of the engine you're working on, you know, and just give yourself about a 10% fudge factor, you know, if the thing produces, you know, like we'll say our 5 gallon a minute pump. So we're 5 gallons a minute, 60 minutes. So we're 300 gallons. Fuel, just for simplicity, 6 pounds a gallon. So we're 1,800 pounds of fuel. So if you got something with a brake specific of 2, say it's an alcohol pro-charged application, and it takes 2 pounds of fuel to make 1 horsepower, then obviously that's going to support 900 horsepower. We've always rated our product in pounds per hour, and back in the big fuel pump Barry Grant days, when he came out with a 400 gallon per hour pump, we always stayed with pounds, and nobody understood why we stayed with pounds. And it's because the dyno doesn't give you a gallon per horsepower. It gives you a pound per horsepower that it takes. So that's how we rate everything.
Gotcha. Are you guys going to offer the in-tank one? You can mount these brushless ones and the standard brushed ones in tank, correct? The Eliminator and the Aeromotive.
Correct.
I've used them before on cars where I've done a C6 with the Eliminator in tank. Is there going to be a brushed version of that with the drop in with the hat and everything too? Are you going to offer some configurations like that?
We have some configurations right now going into fuel cells, a standard aluminum type fuel cell. It will probably be a demand issue whether we take that technology and make it so you can put it in a stock type Corvette gas tank. A lot of the problems that we have with a pump that large is the wells are not big enough inside those tanks to hold fuel. And that thing, you figure at 5 gallons a minute, look how fast it's recirculating an entire 20-gallon tank. It actually draws the fuel out of the well so fast that it can't. The jet siphon isn't big enough to bring fuel back over if it has a jet siphon, or D cell and X cell. You pull enough fuel out of that well where it sucks it up so fast that you have issues. So I don't know where we will go with this technology in those applications, but if the customer demands it, we're all about listening to the customer.
Right on.
My 2 cents. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say my 2 cents is that they do some serious R&D, because they were testing these pumps on some of my customers like 3 years ago. So it was really impressive that the R&D they were doing. Like, give us back the pump. We want to change something. Okay, it was working fine, but that was a couple of different cars they worked on. So the R&D was really neat.
And that's we're an engineering company. Steve Matusik, who is the founder and owner of Aeromotive, he's an engineer by trade. Got tired of working for big corporate America in the defense world and decided that he'd always been a car guy. His father was a racer, so he dreamed up a carbureted fuel pump and got a print made for it. Never built one. Conned a venture capital group into investing in him after he went back to college to get a master's in business, because they said an engineer doesn't know how to conduct business. Packed his family up. Got a small check, moved from St. Louis to Kansas City, and that's how the company was started 20-some years ago. So we didn't name ourselves Aeromotive Fuel Pumps. We named ourselves Aeromotive Fuel Systems, because we believe in having a product and a system that we give you a complete kit. We don't hand you a fuel pump that's capable of supporting 1,000 horsepower and say good luck.
I also highly recommend calling your tech line when you make your purchase. The ultimate steps are call the tech guy. Be thankful for the time he's going to spend telling you exactly how to do it, especially get the suction side right. That's where everybody screws up. Don't make it, have to suck fuel and all that stuff uphill, that kind of stuff. But talk to those guys. They'll set you straight, and then buy it from them because they helped you with the tech.
The great thing about the company, Brett Clow's been doing our tech for 16, 17, 18 years.
Yeah, he's awesome.
And he has seen everything, from a guy that calls up that says his fuel pressure regulator is not working. It's not boost referencing 1-to-1. And he asks the guy, well, how are you measuring that? And the guy's like, well, I got the hose in here in the car with me, and I'm watching the fuel pressure gauge, and I'm sucking on this thing and blowing on this thing, and I can't make the fuel pressure change. So Brett politely asks him, do you have a tire pressure gauge laying around? The guy's like, yeah. He goes, well, is it a digital one? Yeah. He goes, well, push the button and blow on it. Let me know how much pressure you can produce. And the guy's like, well, I can't even get it to 1. And he goes, well, then obviously you can't produce enough pressure or vacuum to test your boost referenced fuel pump regulator, fuel pressure regulator. So, and Brett never got mad. Brett never raised his voice. He was perfectly calm. I'm over there rolling on the floor laughing as I'm listening to this. But that's the type of service we want to provide to our customers.
It's good. It's solid. Now they're really well known. I'm somewhat local. These guys about 3 hours away, and regionally well known. Everybody runs their stuff and is happy with it when you follow the directions.
Well, and our product's no different than my competitors. My competitors all build, nice product, and it works in most everybody's applications. But if you don't follow the directions that we produce, whether it's me, whether it's MagnaFuel, whether it's Holley, you're going to have trouble. We spend a tremendous amount of money to figure out these systems, so that is why, on an A1000, the female fitting on that thing is a -10. It's so you'll screw a -10 fitting into it and put a -10 line on the inlet. Scott mentioned fuel filters. You would not believe how many people we have that think that they put the 10 micron on the inlet side of the pump, that it's going to work better. Well, it's really easy to remember. We make paper elements and we make stainless elements. So you suck through stainless and you push through paper. And as long as you're not an E85 or an ethanol methanol, that works just fine. If you're E85 ethanol methanol, we have a microglass filter that is a 10 micron that works wonderful. So with Jack French's injectors, the billet atomizer stuff, he is just anal about 10 micron. Can't be any finer or any coarser than 10 micron. And we didn't have an element that would work in an ethanol methanol environment because it was paper, it was cellulose. So we came out with a microglass filter element, and it solved all those problems.
So I'm glad you talked about ethanol. It kind of transitions into a good one that you see a lot of debate on the material selection. When you're planning out a fuel system on an E85 car, what are the considerations that you recommend to take in?
No bare aluminum, which is a problem because all these fuel cells, these aluminum fuel cells, are bare aluminum. That's the big one. Staying away from, like I said, a paper type element. And there's tons and tons of different filter elements out there and filter housings. And there's a reason that Earl's has one that's $9 and it looks like it has a rock in it. Okay, that's to flow a, old 327 mechanical fuel pump. That is not for today's high volume, high pressure fuel pumps. And the surface area of that filter element is like 1 square inch. So how much debris does it take to plug that thing up? Our small filters, if you were to cut the end caps off of them and stretch that media out, it's about 36 square inches of filter material. So, it lasts quite a long time. And the other thing people don't think about when they're building a new application or a new combination is that fuel system is going to be its dirtiest when it's brand new. Gasoline is an amazing solvent, and it dislodges everything in that brand new fuel cell that you just got. So the inlet filter and the outlet filter, I recommend after about 50 miles of driving on a brand new combination, cleaning the stainless one and throwing the paper one away and putting another one in.
God, we run into that so often. I get so many calls and remotes, and they ran for 20 minutes, ran for 40 minutes, and man, I don't know what's going on. Fuel pump sounds weird. Losing fuel pressure. Ugh. Yeah. That's good advice.
What about fuel line selection for same fuel systems?
It's critical. In our catalog and on our website, we have a power program, or power planner is what we call it. And it goes through about 80% of the potential combinations with our fuel pumps. And it tells you, inlet size, outlet size, don't go any smaller than this, return size. So many people get confused on returns because they had a 3/8 fuel line going forward when they were carbureted and their motor made 60 horsepower. And now they're going to build, a 1,500 horsepower turbo application. So they try and use that -6 return line with a 6 gallon a minute pump. And they can't understand why they can't get the fuel pressure down below 150 PSI. Well, it just physically can't bypass enough fuel through that return line. So there's so many small components within a fuel system that people take for granted or don't think they're important that are actually very, very important. We have a tremendous amount of people that have too big of an orifice inside a return regulator, and basically the pump isn't big enough to provide enough volume to build any pressure because it's all wanting to go out the bypass port. People don't take that into consideration.
Could you talk a little bit about the materials of your fuel lines? Like, I know when I'm helping somebody with a fuel system like E85, it needs to be PTFE, or you're just going to end up with a bunch of mush everywhere.
It's really funny. I worked for Fregola Performance Systems a couple years ago, And we were probably one of the first people to really embrace the PTFE cord hose. We'd use a synthetic rubber cord hose forever, which Larry Larson's truck, in 2014, I plumbed that thing with synthetic rubber cord hose. That thing obviously sees both pump gas and it sees M1. I am yet to replace a fuel line on that thing.
Awesome.
Don't know
That's
why.
good to hear.
He has a really good lecture on the rubber types and quality and organic rubber and the history and why things move to synthetic and the different qualities. I don't know if he's got time to talk about that, but that was stuff I learned.
We'll work on the PTFE stuff. So the PTFE stuff will last forever. Fuel permeation became a huge problem as we started putting more and more additives into our gasoline. People would walk out and, they'd spend $1,000 on a fuel system and plumbing it. And they'd walk out in their garage and they'd swear that their fuel cell had just fallen out of their trunk and it spilled all over the place. Well, as fuel got nastier and nastier smelling, we noticed it more and more, but the core of the rubber hose is porous. It's not porous enough to leak liquid, but it's porous enough to allow vapor to permeate through the rubber core. There's a reason that GM, Ford, and Chrysler, back in the early days of pollution control, went away from rubber hose and they had charcoal canisters, and all that was to make the customer happy that they weren't smelling fuel. So any rubber cord hose will permeate smell. Some of the marine applications, we've had problems where it has trapped fumes and trapped enough fumes inside an engine compartment that it would cause an issue on initial startup, especially in the old days when we had points type distributors, because they obviously create a little bit of a spark when the points misalign. Don't see that much anymore because of today's ignitions, but the PTFE cord hose is wonderful. It lasts forever. There's no smell. It's a little bit of a pain in the butt to work with. There's multiple different styles of PTFE hose. The more money you spend, the nicer and more pliable that hose will be. Brown & Miller has some stuff that's, $15, $18 an inch that I swear you could bend the stuff on an 1/8 of an inch bend radius and it won't collapse. And it weighs about an ounce a foot. Not practical for most of us. But a lot of the PTFE cord hose is a 60 thousandths thick wall cord hose, and it's hard to manipulate. You better make sure that you buy a 60-degree hose end and instead of trying to bend the hose, just because it's hard to bend. But it will eliminate. If I'm going to build a new car and I don't want to have to worry about plugging up fuel filters or clogging up injectors, I'm not going to buy a rubber cord hose.
Is that
we've got two listeners that are both on the same question. One of them is wondering. He says he feels that incorrect suction design is the main failure in EFI installs. And the next person says, what percentage of pumps are killed by cavitation? Can you expound on that?
Sure. Both of those are the exact same problem. Cavitation is obviously when we pull air molecules away from the liquid or the fuel. That is a huge problem in our world. 99.9% of the time, that problem is caused by an inlet restriction, improper vents on a fuel cell. You got to remember, if you're pulling 5 gallons a minute worth of fuel out of that fuel cell, you better have a big enough damn hole to allow, 5 gallons worth of air to come back in. I've had many people on high horsepower drag race stuff that, maybe they got a 21 gallon a minute pump and it's a blown pro mod style deal, and they got a -6 vent. And the damn thing will haul ass to about 80 feet and then it shuts off. And then you walk over there and you're like, okay, where's the real vent? Because that little fake looking thing on top surely can't be the vent. And it's like, oh yeah, that's the vent.
How many streetcar guys do you have that sump their stock tank and don't put a properly sized vent on it?
Most of them, almost all of them. And the easiest way to solve that problem is to have them go drive around with the gas cap off.
Yeah, it tries to suck the tank flat.
Yeah, but with the gas cap off, now you got a 1.5 inch hole that's allowing air to enter, and all of a sudden they're like, holy crap, if I just race it with my gas cap off, I don't have a problem. But yes, that is a big problem, especially on the stock gas tanks, because we don't think about it, to be honest with you. And then there is no real easy way to put a -10 vent in one. And I'm a big proponent on putting a vent in a gas tank and putting a filter on top of the vent, because you would not believe how much dust and dirt and crap that thing will suck into the fuel cell. But
So-
back to the original question, the cavitation issue has always been a problem. With the fuel pumps submerged in the gas tanks, we eliminated a tremendous amount of those issues because we didn't allow the consumer to buy a -6 inlet line. We, basically submerged the pump for them, and okay, now the thing is sitting in, actual liquid, so it's not having any issue trying to pull fuel. Hot fuel handling issues is you introduce a vacuum onto a liquid, it lowers the boiling point. So I get a lot of people out in the desert Southwest that, in the early days, the A1000 got kind of a bad rap because everybody said it would get hot and shut off. Well, the pump never shut off. The pump just didn't have the ability to pump a boiling gaseous gas anymore because it was boiling on the inlet side and cavitating because we have a pump that'll support 1,000 horsepower. We're driving down the road consuming, maybe 50 horsepower worth of fuel. The pavement's 160 degrees out. We ran our fuel line right next to our exhaust all the way forward. We got twin turbos on the thing, and we got a carbon fiber hood, which is an awesome insulator. We run the fuel up through the fuel rails, which is attached to a 200-degree engine, and then we send it back to the gas tank. We get down to 5 gallons worth of fuel, and 4.5 gallons of it's boiling. And people would always argue, there's no way the pump just shuts off and that it won't run. So I always told people, hey, when that thing shuts off, supposedly, run back to the back of that car and put your hand on the gas tank. And if you can hold your hand on that gas tank for 5 seconds, I will send you a brand new fuel pump.
The drag week lesson.
Oh, yeah,
Rocky
exactly.
Mountain Race Week, especially. Everybody was.
Well, yeah, because altitude makes it even worse.
Yep.
Obviously,
You know,
there's
so,
a temperature of fuel where there's a temperature of the fuel where it's going to boil and the car will not run or start properly. Is there a certain temperature threshold that you try to keep the pumps operating in, or is the engine going to shut down before the pump gets damaged?
No, the engine will typically start having intermittent run issues as the thing starts gulping air, obviously. I've seen gasoline with a big enough pump. We'll say one of our old Pro Series pumps, which was a pump that was capable of supporting 2,000 plus horsepower, has a -12 inlet. So that baby sings the fuel up and back in a big hurry. And I've seen fuel temperatures as low as 125, 130 degrees where it would boil because we've introduced such a huge vacuum onto the gas tank because that pump is so big and it is sucking so hard, trying to pull fuel out.
Gotcha.
So do you have a recommendation on the proper way to vent a tank? That's one of the questions that we have.
It really depends on whether it's a stock gas tank or whether it's, an aftermarket type deal.
He's asking stock, that one specific guy is.
Okay, what I usually tell people, how big is your feed line to your pump? So if it's a -10, and for those of you guys that don't know what -10 is, that's a measurement of 16ths. So 10/16 is the original Army Navy spec, and that's what AN stands for. So 10/16 we all know is 5/8. So you better have a 5/8 vent in this thing if you got a 5/8 feed line. If you got a 1-inch feed line, you better have a 16 vent in the thing. With our mechanical pumps that we do, I sold 3 or 4 today that were anywhere from 16 gallons a minute to 32 gallons a minute. And I got guys putting 2.5-inch diameter vents on these things. It is that critical.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Might as well just put a big old breather on it.
Yes, and what's really funny is so many crew members smoke. You'll see, a blown Pro Mod or maybe an alcohol funny car sitting there running, and the crew chief will have his, foot up on the thing smoking a cigarette, and he'll drop his hand down close to the fuel cell, and all of a sudden you'll see that smoke change directions and start heading for the fuel cell. And that's the pump sucking air back through, and it's, because smoke is pretty easy to move and manipulate, it's really an eye opener of what is going on. I worked for a chassis builder back in the 90s, and we built a pretty high profile guy, a Pro Mod car, and we used to buy Harwood fuel cells, and this was so long ago that we put fuel cells in the trunk. And it was a nitrous deal, so it had a 400 and 280 Barry Grants, and we used to buy Harwood fuel cells that were blanks, and we could put whatever outlets in it, whatever vent in it, and that's kind of how we did everything. Well, this guy, because we were all a bunch of dummies building a race car, we didn't know how to plumb it. He brought his own plumbing expert in, and the guy did a beautiful job, and the plumbing looked really great, and they got this thing ready to run, and they filled it up full of fuel and turned the pumps on, and all of a sudden there was this god-awful noise that sounded like somebody standing on a cat's tail. And the guy shuts the ignition off, and he hadn't even fired the car yet. He's like, what in the hell was that noise? Well, he never put a vent in the fuel cell. Well, that noise was the air getting sucked in through the cap, and it was making this god-awful squealing noise. Well, it was also shrinking the fuel cell down so much that it fell out of the straps that were holding it up. And that was two 280s and a 400. And those are sliding vane pumps, so they don't create a tremendous amount of vacuum to begin with. So the vent deal is critical.
Okay, so with moving on from the vent deal, we had one question regarding running hard lines instead of, say, a flexible line, and pros and cons of hard line, and then going to using the hard lines as far as location of the regulator or the best place to mount the regulator and where the regulator would work best.
I'm a firm believer that the regulator needs to be as close to the injector as it can. When the demand for fuel changes, the further that signal has to travel, the slower the engine will be, or the injector or the fuel pump or the fuel pressure will be to change. So we still have a lot of guys that put the fuel pressure regulator at the gas tank still. Usually that's a guy that doesn't want to spend, an extra $100 on a 15-foot return line. But you'll notice, ProLine or whoever you want to pick, anybody that builds successful forced induction type applications, that fuel cell is usually within a foot of the fuel rail. And I'm a firm believer that that's where it goes. As far as hardline, the only downside to hardline, there's probably two of them. One, it transfers heat so much faster than a rubber or PTFE cord hose because those two materials work as an insulator. The other downside to that is it transfers a lot of harmonics. And if you don't have the thing Adel clamped properly, it's pretty easy to rub a hole in one. That's the nice thing about a steel braided hose. Even after you rub a hole in the steel braid, you still got either a rubber or PTFE core that you have to go through. I have seen chatter on fuel pressure regulators before because you have too big of a return or you don't have enough pump, basically is what it is. So the fuel pressure regulator is constantly trying to close the bypass to build pressure. And I have watched the harmonics of that just shake the living crap out of hard lines before, where the rubber core or a PTFE core will absorb a lot of that harmonics that it's seeing.
What about regulator position? We got a guy asking about specific advice on where to mount the regulator. Is it a big deal? Does it matter? Or what considerations?
Like I said, I want it as close to the injectors as I can get it, and the fuel pressure regulator has no clue whether it's right side up or upside down. Gotcha. And obviously monitor your pressure on the rails to, that's kind of our thing here. So you can see what's going on. Absolutely. And you know what, if we had a way to time it, you could put a regulator back at, in the gas tank where the gas tank is in the back of the car. And it would be really fun if we had a way to measure the time that it takes as maybe the fuel pressure. Yeah. For when the thing goes into boost, and you start boost referencing, it would be interesting to see if that 15 feet away makes a big difference. Sure.
So with talking about return lines off the regulator, a lot of the streetcar stuff, some people are asking about using a heat exchanger on the return line. So something post regulator in the return, what kind of a effect does that restriction after, between the regulator and between the fuel cell on the way back, does that have on your system?
If it's a decent fuel cooler, Duraley makes a pretty nice one that's a high flow one. I wouldn't recommend it with a 5 gallon a minute pump, but probably anything smaller than that. There may be a 1 to 2 psi increase in fuel pressure because of that restriction, depending on how big the pump is. But I do have a lot of people that run a cooler on the return side. I'm old enough to remember when cool cans were cool, and every carbureted vehicle in the world has them. Well, I got guys now that still use them, but they use them on the return and they put dry ice in it. The dry ice will last a couple hours on your drive, and it takes the fuel temperature and knocks 20 to 30 degrees out of it pretty quickly. And I'll terrify you more. I have people that drop dry ice into their fuel cells. The byproduct of dry ice boiling is nothing. I mean, we can take fuel temperature down into the 20s when you talk about picking power up. The only important thing you got to remember
change solid to a gas.
Yes. And the big thing you got to remember is you better have one big ass vent, because when that dry ice starts to boil,
your vent's really good on that one.
Yeah, we did it on. We raced some limited induction asphalt late model stuff. So it was 352 barrel, 11-to-1 steel headed stuff. It might have made 350 or 360 horsepower. And if we could get the fuel down to in about the 30-degree range, we could pick up about 25% power in the summer times, in July, and you could always tell the guy that was new to this way of cheating, because fuel would be blowing out of the vent because he had a -8 vent, and, the thing could not release the gas fast enough out of the fuel cell. So it would end up pushing fuel out the vent.
NHRA originally banned cool, cans because of leakage on the starting line and all of that. So obviously the dry ice solves that, with the exception of any condensate on the outside of the can. Any issues with that at all?
No, it's not a whole lot different than the air to water intercoolers that we see condensation. Lizard skin works wonders for solving a lot of that. Most of the fuel coolers that you see now can take 10 to 15 degrees of fuel temperature out of their stuff with just an air style cooler. I'm a firm believer that if you're smart enough to build a race car, you ought to be able to be smart enough to make sure that water doesn't get on the racetrack. Whether that's building a diaper, whether that's building a containment pan, whether that's, putting the damn thing in the center of the car. So if it does puke out a little bit of water, it's obviously not going to be under a tire. Putting the cool can far enough back where it's behind the rear tires. Obviously condensation is a problem. We all hear the racetrack announcer screaming, "Shut your air conditioners off before you come to the starting line." So we know condensation becomes a problem, but you don't really see it anymore, because, to be honest with you, there people that go to the drag strip anymore, they don't really have a problem with hot fuel handling. Or if they do, they'll build some sort of a fuel cooler off their air to water or off a regular water tank.
We got one that's popped up a couple times. Go ahead, Bill.
I just wanted to circle back on the hardline question. Was that equally applicable to aluminum, steel, and stainless lines, or would you make any distinctions with the different types of hardlines?
The denser the line, the less effect all of that has on it. So a stainless line would be my first preference, as long as it wasn't a stainless that was extremely brittle. Aluminum is great because, certain types of aluminum are extremely soft. So they're easy to work with. The harmonics don't seem to affect it as much.
Just gotta be careful of what fuel you put through it.
But that soft of aluminum sometimes scares me. I have never plumbed a race car or a street car with any hard line. Just I'm too lazy to do it. Tube nuts and sleeves and double flaring stuff just aggravates the crap out of me. Doing brakes is bad enough. So I don't have a tremendous amount of experience in that. Just what I've seen from customers. It looks wonderful. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful when it's done right. But it's still, the vibration and the shaking scares me to death.
So on that vibration and shaking, there's two different cars that I worked on that had a issue where with pretty big injectors, and you could actually see huge pulses in the fuel pressure as the duty cycle went up. Both cars had more than adequate fuel volume from the pump. They're both mechanical pump cars. So what type of things could cause that type of issue?
Just the harmonics of when the injectors open and close based on their relativity to each other. If you guys remember back in the Chrysler K-Car days, they had a fuel dampener they used to put on the end of the rails on some of the Chrysler K-Car and van stuff. That was to try and fix some of that pulsation or fuel pressure pulsation, basically. Typically, even though you said you had plenty of pump on it, it is a byproduct of not enough fuel volume. Was it a V8 application?
Yeah, but one of them was a 10-cylinder, one of them was 8-cylinder, and both of them had Aeromotive pumps on them, big ones. The one had the big black pump, and the other one has a custom deal that's like 30 gallon per minute or something like that.
Sure. No, it sounds. I mean, are they huge injectors? Are they 700 pounders?
Yeah, there's the one car's got 575s and 700s, one each per hole. And the other one's got just some 2700s, two sets.
If you change the tune and raise the fuel pressure by 10 or 15 pounds, did it fix that problem or help that problem, or did you try that?
I did not try it. No, I kind of asked around to see if there was maybe something with the regulator or some damper that people were using to fix that. But does raising fuel pressure normally affect that?
I've seen it fix it. I've also seen people that have that issue where it's, I mean, almost sounds like a dang exhaust leak. It's so loud. You can hear, it seems like you can hear every injector opening and closing, and it makes no more power when you solve that problem. It's just owner of the car doesn't like listening to the noise. But increasing the pressure at times, obviously the big injectors are rated at 90 PSI is where they typically get their flow numbers from. And when you try and run them down at 45, 50, 60 PSI, sometimes it causes those issues. It would be worth a try if you ever get the car back.
Yeah, I'll have to give that a shot. So, somebody had suggested maybe running a second regulator. That the additional damping from the second regulator could help clean that up as well. Is that recommended, or you think that's not the right way to go?
I mean, I would be interesting to see. I don't think I see how that would fix it. I mean, I have a bunch of stuff that's, we don't make a regulator bigger than 27 pounds or 27 gallons a minute. They can control anything bigger than 27 gallons a minute. So I don't see it ever an issue on a specific size of pump. I do on specific size of injectors. But I guess what I'm saying is, we can make 4,000 horsepower on one regulator with one pump, no problem. So I don't know why, treating each half of the engine as its own fuel system would make any difference.
No, I think they meant just putting it in parallel, like, that to just to add damping overall to the whole system, because the regulator acts as a damper of sorts, right? For the pulses.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the diaphragm inside of it's made out of a rubber material, and in a perfect world, you don't ever want the diaphragm or the seat touching the regulator. It would be interesting to get that car back in and open that regulator up, take the 4 bolts out of the top of it and take the diaphragm out and look at the seat that thing seats against in the regulator and see if there's a chatter marks. Because if there's chatter marks, then we definitely have an issue on flow. A lot of times the chattering of the regulator will sound a lot like injectors pulsating or harmonics within the system. But I still don't know. You put 2 regulators on it, you've doubled the return size, which would scare me if the regulator was properly sourced for that pump. Because if you've got a regulator that's good working with 16 gallons a minute, and all of a sudden you double that bypass size, you may run into more problems than you had before.
Okay.
Have you had success or seen someone have success with the GM sourced fuel rail dampening material?
Not that specific stuff. I have seen people with some success that used, like I said, the old Mopar dampening deal that bolted on the regulator. I think the first time I ever saw that, Sonny started doing some naturally aspirated fuel injected stuff for Comp Eliminator back in the maybe 94, 95 era, and a couple of engines out of the Midwest that I saw showed up with those on it, and it made the fuel pressure graph look really good on the race pack. I don't know that it made the car run any better.
That's interesting. Because I know from logging fuel pressure, Delgado, what kind of sample rate do you got to run where you feel comfortable that you're seeing all the pulses?
On that one particular car, I'm logging at 100 hertz. On the other one, it's at 200 hertz, and I can see the pulses on both cars.
Right. That's You can tell something's going on, and you can tell because, like, at idle and low fuel use, things are pretty smooth. It's when things making a pass and wide open, making full power. everything gets nasty, noisy. A lot of guys just write that off. I'm like, there's something going on there. Might be worth some effort to minimize
That's
that.
my
might
deal.
be something as simple as an injector, not the injectors themselves. It might be just the fuel rail is emptying out too quick. Like it might need a bigger rail,
needs more
bigger
plenum volume
going into it.
But if the fuel rail was running out of volume, you would see that in pressure.
Right, and we're talking about observing the pressure spikes with fuel pressure sensors, which you see. Yeah.
Yeah, the fuel pump is keeping up, but the injectors are just draining the rail too quick, so it's dumping this big load, and it's got a little spike right there when it dumps it.
When you
but I mean,
that,
the regulator, you would think that the regulator would have enough reserve to offset, because what kind of I kind of wrote it off before, and we did some mechanical damping with on the sensor to kind of smooth it out, but what I was watching a video the other night about the water hammer effect, and how when you open and close a valve that it can create these huge spikes and pulses like in a sealed system like that. And that's what kind of went back to the whole thought process of, part of the regulator's job, or part of the regulator's effect on the system, is to dampen some of those pulses. And that's kind of why I brought the whole question of a second regulator, because the regulator has that amount of movement up and down that it can do to kind of almost give you a reserve, right? So when that injector opens, it drains a certain amount of fuel out, and that regulator can move closed that same amount until the pump catches back up and opens back up, right? Am I thinking about that correctly?
Yes.
So if I had two regulators, that would double the amount of reserve volume where both regulators would close down, and that's where my thought process came in of offsetting that pulse from the injector. I mean, basically, it acts as like a damper would act, like just a straight damper would act, right?
In theory, yes, I think it would. On these applications, are they plumbed with the fuel going through the fuel rail to the regulator, or are they plumbed to where the fuel comes to the regulator and then goes to the fuel rail, and it's deadheaded at the end of the fuel rails?
It comes out of the pump. They splits out of the pump into two rails, out of both rails into both sides of the regulators, and then back out to the tank.
No. That's the way I like to see it, because that way the rail is seeing all the fuel that is being pumped. Where the other way, the fuel rail is not seeing all the fuel that's being pumped, because the bypass is before the rail.
Just so we don't breeze over that, can you expound on that a little bit? Because I guarantee you there's somebody out there listening that has their car plumbed, quote unquote, the wrong way, that may not understand exactly what's the benefits and why would you do it the right way.
We've never been able to prove you'll make any more power, but simple math, basic hydraulics, it makes sense. If your pump is going to produce 5 gallons a minute, letting all 5 gallons of that fuel pass through both fuel pressure or both fuel rails before being bypassed to the tank allows the engine to see every ounce of fuel that pump is delivering. So you would basically, like you said, bring the fuel line out of the fuel pump, go through your fuel filter, get up close to the back of the engine or front of the engine, depending on your preference, and run a Y block, split it, go through both fuel rails with each of them aligned, then come out of the back of the fuel rail or the front of the fuel rail, and then run that into the regulator. So like I said, the fuel rails are full. The fuel injectors are seeing every ounce of fuel that's being pumped, and then the regulator is taking everything that the fuel that the engine is not consuming and either holding it in that fuel rail or bypassing it back to the gas tank. We see it a lot on carbureted applications where a guy will basically run a bypass carburetor fuel pressure regulator, and you'll put the fuel pressure regulator on the back side of the log, so you'll come into the front of the log. All the fuel that the pump can pump will pass by each one of the needles and seats, and whatever the carburetor can't consume or doesn't need, it sends back to the gas tank. So you're always exposing the engine to all of the fuel that could be pumped.
And a byproduct is the pump operates at a lower pressure, correct?
Well, the pressure is determined by the fuel pressure regulator.
Right. But if you deadheaded it, then you would be demanding the pump operates at a
Absolutely.
higher
If you
pressure all
deadheaded
the
it,
time.
you would kill one of my pumps if you deadheaded, one
I
of those
accidentally deadheaded an A1000 once, and it made horrible noises.
Oh yes,
it let you
And
know
the
it wasn't
A1
happening.
Briefly,
Briefly, and then it stopped.
Yeah, well, the
Goddamn
A1000
Aeromotive
now,
junk. Sorry.
I know. The A1000 now has an internal bypass.
It actually is still going. That was a whoopsie I had, but it still works.
That's all right. I'll tell you a whoopsie on us at Las Vegas after we ran. Yeah, the first time we ran in the fives with Larry's truck, Anderson Dick, who owns Fuel Tech, was there.
My good friend
And,
Anderson. Yep.
So just to be ornery, Larry's like, you know what? Let's convert this thing back over to street mode, and we're gonna go drive this thing down to In-N-Out. I'm gonna take Anderson. We're gonna get burgers. So we're flipping the thing over, and we're feeling pretty salty about then because we'd run 595 or whatever and gotten into the fives. And Larry's fuel system has a fuel cell that has 2 in-tank pumps, and that's what we drive on. And then up front, it has one of the Aeromotive big mechanical pumps, and it's driven off the front of the dry sump pump. So we have a little drive shaft that basically connects a hex on the front of the dry sump pump to the fuel pump. Well, we're swapping this thing all over, and we get all done, and it's like, all right, let's start it. Well, we kind of forgot to disconnect the big mechanical pump. So we deadheaded this thing for about 5 seconds into a fuel system or Systems 1 fuel filter. And it blew a Systems 1 fuel filter in about 7 different pieces.
And if you guys are familiar with the System 1, that's the canister style one. That's pretty heavy duty as it is.
Yeah. So we're guessing we probably exceeded, 800 or 900 PSI. The cool thing, if there is such a thing as a cool thing when we did this, was every Frigola hose on this thing survived.
Right. I remember this.
So,
that was in November of 2014 at Las Vegas. I remember this. Yeah, I was standing out of the way when that happened.
Yeah, and I couldn't figure out what the hell the clear liquid was that was coming out. I thought we killed a radiator.
Right.
And then it's like, shut the dang thing off. And I look down there and the whole bottom of that System 1's blown out. The side of it's blown out. And it's like, I think we forgot to disconnect the mechanical pump.
So the System 1 fuel filter is the same construction as the oil filter. Sounds like.
Yes.
That's interesting.
Yes. And he's come out with a billet one. The trash can ones that he's made for the last 20 years are actually a cast piece. So I'm sure I would have blown a hose into a million pieces had I had a billet fuel filter, because I don't think it would have split as easily as that one. But even though it split, it was absolutely no fault of the Systems 1 filter. It's not designed to run at 600 or 700 psi.
Can we circle back for a second to a question that Scott raised? So if you have the correct fuel system plumbing as described, and you're seeing this situation where at idle and low pulse widths, the jaggedness in the fuel pressure data log is barely visible. But as you get down track and now you're running the system and you've got and now you're seeing much more of the spikiness, out of that data log, is there a way to diagnose what might be the problem? Let's just say hypothetically this is an eliminator pump with the EFI regulator, half-inch lines up and back, done according to Hoyle and all this, and it shows that along with a slight decrease, we're talking 3, maybe 4 pounds of fuel pressure according to the sensor.
I would look at vent.
Interesting.
That would probably be the first place I would start, just because you're losing volume. Okay, why are you losing, a volume and still seeing an erratic fuel pressure? The pump could be hurt too. I mean, if the pump doesn't have the ability to pump, what the amount of fuel that you think it's going to pump, that could be it. But I would be really interested, to look for some sort of a restriction on the inlet side, whether it's a clogged filter, whether it is a kinked line, whether, it is a vent issue, is probably where I would start looking, just because you're losing fuel pressure And when we lose fuel pressure, we automatically think, demand and its flow. And typically the two are tied together, very closely. So that's probably the direction that I would start to look, is some sort of a restriction or a cavitation issue on the inlet side. The other thing that I would probably look at, depending on what ECU's in it, depending on how much electronics is in it, I would like to see battery voltage at the pump as it's going down the racetrack.
I was talking about, I just did an article for Race Pages and talked about current monitoring too of all your devices. It's neat to look at. I'd like to know what the current's doing on all the different devices. And Larry's truck is a smart wire for a PDM, so it's neat. You can actually look at the current draw of the electric pumps when he's going, the one when he's got the in road trim. It's kind of interesting to see.
But what most people don't take into most people don't use large enough wiring to wire a lot of this stuff. And we'll see that at high demand. Where that 18 gauge wire just cannot travel enough, electricity to keep that pump happy. It can at low flow numbers, but when you're building 30 pounds of boost and you're expecting this electric pump, to raise the fuel pressure from, 45 to 75, you're making that thing strain its guts out. Well, if it doesn't have the ability to pass the current into that electric motor, it will not keep up. It will slow down.
Tom at 3V was talking. Tom, if you want to speak up about the vent location.
Just that we had seen different pressure changes under the car at speed on some of the Pro Stock stuff. So some of these vent locations that people are putting them where they think is the ideal static with the hood off location may be aggravating some of that situation.
Oh, absolutely. I've seen a ton of vents that actually had air passing by the vent, and it created a vacuum and, basically would suck fuel out of the vent. The vent became too good, in all reality. But I've also seen
time on people's cars going down the track where it sucks it out the top and they got a fuel stream coming out the back of their car.
Yeah. And I've also seen people put the vent in a high pressure area to where it blocked the vent.
That's what I was talking about.
Physically,
exactly.
Yeah. Not physically. Nothing covered the vent. Just, the atmospheric change didn't allow the thing to be able to vent.
Yep.
Well, one of the other reasons, and this goes back a chapter here, that I always put the regulators after the rails, and you may agree or disagree, is I ran into a situation before where the pump was unknowingly picking up, it was cavitating a little bit and it was picking up air into the fuel system. And because the regulator was before the rails, that all that air was getting trapped in the rails. And somebody else built this fuel system. It was a car I was tuning for another shop. And we would do like 2 or 3 pulls on a dyno. And then by like the 4th pull, it would just go stupid lean. And we couldn't figure out what was going on. We'd pull the injectors out, we'd check them, we'd clean them. We were trying to figure this issue out. And it turned out to be that the pumps were picking up air out of the tank, or cavitating in a tank and picking up air bubbles. It may have been from the return or whatever, sloshing up the fuel. And the air was actually just getting trapped in that rail. And eventually it just created a big air bubble in there, and no fuel was actually getting to the injectors. So from that day forward, I always made sure when a car came in that the regulator was after the rails. That way, at least there's an opportunity for the fuel to carry the air out of those rails and out the return back into the tank if that were to ever happen.
Well, the nice thing about that, if you did have an air bubble that was trapped in there, when it got pinned against the regulator after the rails, the flow of the fuel should compress that air and basically eliminate it.
Right.
So
something that I ran into a long time ago. Figured it was relevant.
Yeah, no, that's the cool thing. I'll spend a day and I'll sit up and I'll listen to Brett talk to our customers and listen to
that's got to be great training, by the way. That's exactly what I would make the new guy do.
Yeah, well, when I was hired, I worked at Aeromotive back in 2002, and my first 2 weeks there, I was going to be the sales manager. I spent sitting next to Brett, and at first I'm like, oh, I'm too good to be listening to this crap. I'm going to go make these guys multimillionaires. I'm going to show them my sales skills. And it's like, holy crap, I can't sell what I don't understand. So I spent 2 weeks there, and it was probably the most beneficial 2 weeks of my career. And currently we're a little short on space. So my office is in the old assembly area of Aeromotive, and Brett is in an office right next to me. So I get to hear,
Ah.
I get to hear all the stories, and that's the cool thing about having a company that's engaged in hearing about problems that people are having. We have so many companies that don't want to hear it. It's bad. It's bad. Well, we can't improve our products if we don't get feedback from our customers. And none of us, we don't build any product on purpose that's bad. That's not real good for your business model.
Right.
So, but we're not perfect, and we can test the crap out of stuff on the bench. We can put it in cars, and cars at 930 feet above of sea level when it's 75 degrees out are way different than somebody going up Pikes Peak when it's 95 degrees out. So unfortunately, we don't have the ability to test everything in every scenario. So we like that feedback from our customers. We don't take criticism and ignore it. We're not perfect. We try to be. With an engineering background, we do our due diligence. We do, plenty of testing. But with the increase of performance cars in the Middle East, holy crap, who would have ever thought we'd have to build fuel systems that could survive 130 degrees? We got a call from a Turkish company that builds drones. They want to know if our 3 gallon a minute pump would survive in plus 90 degrees Celsius to negative 65 degrees Celsius, because they were going to use it to fuel a dang drone. And it's like, holy crap, we never tested it there, and they're like, well, why not? And it's like, well, because this is for a flipping race car. We don't race when it's that cold or that hot.
So along the quality checks, how do you guys deal with counterfeiters and maybe MAP policy violators?
Counterfeiters. Boy, you want to talk about irritating.
I got to walk around SEMA. It's been maybe 4 years, 5 years ago, with Steve Matusik and some of his guys, and look at the counterfeiters and have him just very eloquent. I guess eloquent is the term. Just very calmly explain. Yeah, here's what they did. Here's how this works. Here's the challenges of manufacturing in today's environment. It was just a really good lecture. But carry on.
We had a big one. I wasn't working for Aeromotive at the time, but I was at the SEMA show working for another company, and I stumbled across some product that was identical to Aeromotive. So I just happened to run into Steve and told him the booth number, and they went over and actually got a cease and desist, and the people were escorted out of the show. And there was a lawsuit filed against them for tens of millions of dollars, and Aeromotive won. The bad thing is they go back to China, and there's absolutely no way you can collect on that money. There's a reason that our fuel pressure regulator may be $190, and when you see one that looks just like it and it's brand new and it costs $65, I hope our industry is not that dumb. That $65 part is not an Aeromotive part.
Oh, you might be surprised.
No, I think people buy it in hopes that it is. And I'll tell you where we kick the imposter's ass. We spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in R&D on diaphragm material, because the EPA changes the formulation of gas like some of us change our underwear. It is absolutely insane how much they change the formulation of gas, and whether it's summer gas, winter gas, high altitude gas, California gas, New York gas. Okay, so the 7-year-old Chinese kid that's trying to make the best regulator that he can obviously doesn't have the resources to do that. So when he goes out to the rubber tree and yanks a big hunk of it off, pokes 4 holes in it, calls it a diaphragm, you get what you pay for. And that's where we kill them. The Chinese obviously can machine product. Hell, they can build a dang atomic bomb. So they can machine product, but they don't know what they don't know. So they look at the diaphragm and they're like, oh, it just needs to be an elastomer type material. And they don't take into consideration that it needs to not deteriorate with gasoline, but they don't care because they know no one's coming back after them because no one's going to find them. So counterfeit stuff is aggravating. Knockoff stuff, we call, there's a lot of stuff out there that doesn't have our name on it that looks a lot like our stuff that I really can't call counterfeit. So we call it knockoff stuff. And in a way, it's flattering. We were the first company to ever mate a mechanical spur gear or G-rotor style pump with electronic fuel injection. So we've had a lot of firsts. We were the first company to build a fuel pump that could support 1,000 horsepower and run over 100,000 miles on the street. So we always try and stay 2 steps ahead of the people knocking stuff off. Our in-tank technology that we've came out with putting a 340 in a 69 Camaro gas tank. We partnered with a gas tank company on that, and danged if the tank company doesn't sell that same design gas tank to some of our competitors. Well, we're getting ready to introduce the next iteration of that design that will have patented product inside of it, so it won't be able to be duplicated or knocked off. So we spend millions of dollars a year on R&D and innovation, and then the bottom feeders come by and knock it off. Part of our industry, unfortunately.
I should add that I have used several of the Aeromotive muscle car tanks for Camaros and Chevelles and that sort of thing, and they have worked flawlessly. I've been very, very happy with them. I got one of the very early releases, and there was a seal issue with where the pump sealed to the tank, and that was taken care of immediately by Aeromotive. But that was the only issue I've had with multiple tank installations. They've been excellent.
And the funny thing is, we're working with a gas tank that was built for, maybe a 350 horsepower engine that was carbureted. And we are trying to figure out how to put a positive displacement, EFI style fuel pump inside of it and not ever uncover the inlet side of the pump, and that's tough. And we have some gas tanks that are inherently tougher than others because they're really wide, they're really shallow, and they're really long. So when you get down to 5 gallons of fuel in a 20-gallon tank and you turn left, all your fuel's now in the far left corner or in the far right corner. When you slam on the brakes, okay, now that fuel's pinned up against the front of the gas tank. Well, depending on where the stock outlet was, we're kind of at the mercy of trying to get fuel out that hole. So we have had some issues in the past, and some gas tanks are worse than others, but we're getting ready to introduce a gas tank that you will probably be able to run down to a gallon of gas and still have fuel control.
So
I want to just derail the fuel pump talk for just a minute, because one of the things when Scott did the introduction with you is that you're also the co-pilot on Larry's truck at times, and it's been killing me because I want to know what it's like riding around in the baddest ass streetcar on the planet, knowing you're in the baddest ass streetcar on the planet, and other people's reactions to it as you're driving around. And if you have any good stories of just running around in the truck, I'd really like to hear, because that thing is just pure evil.
Probably the coolest thing of that whole deal, unfortunately you get pretty complacent because you get used to being around Larry, and Larry's the most humble person that you'll ever meet. The thing that probably trips my trigger the most is how well thought out that truck is.
I can confirm this.
For doing what we are doing. We have more tricks and more gadgets to allow only 2 people to work on that thing, that now when we're out doing our no prep racing, it's still just me and him. That's the entire crew, so we can do it in drag week. We can do it at the racetrack. Some of the looks that you get, it's dumbfounding because, Larry's just Larry to me. He's a good friend. He's been a friend for a long time, and he's done some amazing things. But he's just Larry. And people will run into people at the gas station, and it's like, holy crap, these people are like falling over on top of you because you're something special. And I just see Larry, my friend. But there's so many people that recognize that truck, and he brought that truck out to prove a point that Hot Rod was letting Unlimited get carried away. And that the average person, not that they could afford it before, but the average person was not going to be able to afford, to compete at that level. Because, if Larry couldn't build that truck himself and didn't get a tremendous amount of help, from Proline and Pro Torque and Rossler and Strange and Weld, he couldn't build that. He didn't have $250,000 to put into a vehicle like that. So he built it to prove a point that, hey, we need to get the rules back under control. And yeah, it was cool, having a 5-second streetcar, but look at Unlimited the last couple of years at drag week, 3 cars, there's a guy or 2 that don't fit into any of the rules, so they get thrown into Unlimited. But in all reality, has there been a good fight for Unlimited?
No, not quite as much interest either in the class right now. Yeah.
No, because I would much rather see Doug Klein and Joe Barry shooting it out with real live steel cars.
Yeah.
That people can relate to. The truck is cool and it's a work of art. And I I challenge anybody at a racetrack to come and look at that truck and
It's
tell me that
super
there is
easy
a
to
vehicle.
service.
Yeah, there's a vehicle out there that is as well built, as that thing. We've run 12 hot rod
even
drag
in
week.
long bed configuration.
Yes, we'll get to
Brilliant.
that.
Go ahead. Take
but
all the
we've
time you
run-
need to. There's no limit here. Go ahead. This is great.
We've run 12 drag week type events. I've been involved in 4 of them or 3 of them. This Larry's Chevy 2 and Larry's truck has never had a cylinder head off. It's never had an oil pan off. It's had an intake manifold off on the Chevy 2. We've lost lifters. We've lost rocker arms. We've lost a transmission. We've lost a rear end.
I think that's a really important point to make. The cylinder heads have never come off. They've replaced some lifters is the craziest thing I've seen them do, and it wasn't that big of a deal.
And we've never had a pan off. We've never put 6 rods and pistons in a freaking motor to get to the next event and said, yeah, it's a street car.
Yeah, pay attention because a lot of others in that class have to do that kind of stuff.
And because Larry is smart enough, Larry's not an ego chaser. So Larry knows that he can't win if he doesn't finish. So we will go out and figure out how fast we really need to go, and we'll go that fast. And, being a newbie or not quite understanding everything, I'm like, oh, hell no, we got to go back up there. That guy's, 300s faster than we are. Larry's like, just, don't worry about it. We get to the next racetrack and maybe we go 500s faster than that guy. So now we're back to tied. And then the next
Come
day
Wednesday morning, he's not even there.
Exactly.
Right.
He's dropped a valve or knocked the pistons out of it or, whatever. So I think that's a testament to Larry's,
strategy.
Engineering is his building of the vehicle and his strategy. And he doesn't let things rattle him. We're going to come back to drag week this year. That's the plan. And, this will sound maybe a little brash, but Larry gave them guys 2 years to figure out how to run in the 5s, and nobody's come close. So he's like, damn it, I guess I'll go back and we'll see if we can do it, and we're going to run Rocky Mountain Race Week in June this year. And it's going to be down here in the flatlands of the Midwest. And, who knows, maybe we can run a 5 in that before we go to Hot Rods Drag Week.
Wow.
But the other thing people don't realize is that motor will get freshened before we do Drag Week or before we do Rocky Mountain Race Week. The rear end will get freshened. The transmission will get freshened. We'll put new tires on it. We'll spend $8,000 or $9,000 in making sure we have spare parts, making sure everything is fresh. And then when we get home, we turn around and do the same damn thing. So this is a $25,000 a week to win a flipping guitar and a jacket that he already has 5 of. So that's kind of why the draw of Hot Rods Drag Week kind of went away, because he didn't have a whole lot to prove. And this is me speaking. This is not Larry speaking.
Understood.
Now Rocky Mountain Race Week we loved doing. It was different. You think Hot Rods Drag Week's tough? You go leave Kearney, Nebraska when it's 100 flipping degrees.
I can.
And you got to drive 425 miles in that flipping truck to get to Denver.
Uphill. Yeah.
Drag week is typically, it's a little cooler. It's been hot in past years, but I don't know the last time Hot Rod had a 400-mile leg. I don't remember the last time Hot Rod had a 1,500-mile week. And that's what drag week, or that's what Rocky Mountain Race Week is. We come out of the mountains at 9,000 feet and we go downhill for 38 miles into Pueblo. Thank God we have trailer brakes, because we would have had the brakes burned off the truck.
I helped wire them suckers up. It was the first Pro Mod style wire harness where he's like, and wire the trailer brake controller and the tail lights, did all that stuff all together. It was a good time. Yeah, it was neat.
And you come down out of the mountains in a rainstorm, and we got treaded tires on the thing. So, hey, we're going 70 miles an hour down this mountain pulling a trailer. The environment is so much tougher up there. And we had a little bit of trouble last year where we thought we had a transmission issue. So we were late leaving Denver. So we got out of Denver and it was dusk. And the first thing we did was go up the mountain to 9,000 feet and start heading down the mountain. Well, after seeing 3 or 4 deer and a moose, Larry's like, we got to slow down. He goes, we're going to hit one of them bastards and they're going to be in the passenger seat with you and it's going to be ugly. So it's like, okay, so that was our only real tough day, except for driving from Pueblo to Great Bend last year in the truck. It was 107 degrees in western Kansas, and we had to pull over about every 25 miles. Truck's running 180 degrees. Larry and I are running about 240, and we're about ready to die. So the extremes of Rocky Mountain Race Week, definitely will show you who's man enough to do one of these deals. And anybody that finishes a drag week or a Rocky Mountain Race Week, they should be proud as punch of themselves, because it is a true testament of how well you've put something together.
Super hard to do. Yeah.
Obviously you need luck, but with Larry, it's like we're never surprised we finish. Someday we're not going to finish, and then we're going to probably be on suicide watch, because we've always finished,
So just as a side thing, you haven't been to one of my classes yet, but we have to get you to one here in Kansas City. I give like a 5-minute segment on project management, some different things I've observed, and Larry leads the charge for smaller shop guys as far as setting goals, setting realistic goals, and building a project plan to achieve them. You get the 10-minute meeting with everybody in the morning. You do this, you do that, and they're well organized, and he gets it done, man. He hits a high percentage of his targets.
And that's the cool thing about on Rocky Mountain Race Week. I know what I got to do, and I'm no tuner. Hell, I can turn a laptop on, but boy,
Larry's got that covered, man. Larry's a kick-ass tuner. Yeah.
So there's certain things that I got to do and certain things that he's got to do. And we may work on the truck for 30 minutes and not say a word to each other because we know what we got to do. It's no different than we race at the no prep deal. We come back for a pass. My job is to get it ready for the next round. His job is to interpret the data and put a tune up in it.
So, and just something to point out to the rest of the crowd listening, a lot of EFI tuners out there, that engine combo had never been tuned on an engine dyno, didn't get to do that, and it had there was no chassis dyno to put it on at the time. It's never been on a chassis dyno yet. So they've all the tuning they've done at Wide Open and with Boost has been feeling their way down the track. Just figuring out the timing is the hardest part. I mean, I know that there's times where you'd figure out where it's too much at a certain boost, but it's interesting how they've had to been forced to have to tune this thing to make it perform without tools that the rest of us are kind of used to using.
The funniest thing in 2014, he took it to Tulsa for the debut, and it had never run on alcohol yet. It ran on alcohol Sunday night for the first.
Oh, I remember.
You were there.
I was helping. I helped the fuel tech was brand new ECU, and check this out. Larry's truck was the third moving thing that had a FT 500 on it. Right, so right before him was Big Chief and Keith Berry, and I got to help. I helped a little bit with the product testing, and then they had me kind of trickle over into the first installs in the field, and Larry was number 3. And so I got to kind of sit in and just make sure the fuel tech worked and did what he wanted. And it did. But man, so the first time we ran that on alcohol, I'm sitting there going, what do you mean? We're just going to go out and make a hit? And he's like, yeah, I'll just stay in it until something feels weird or whatever. We'll, okay, well, no idea how much fuel it needed to consume. You're literally just going to go make a hit. And we didn't have, at the time, it didn't have closed loop corrections on it, but fortunately it was on alcohol. But these guys knew how to read plugs, so it really wasn't that bad, but it was just scary as hell moment for me to sit there and observe in person.
And it's a testament to Proline, that motor, she'll tool down the road and get 10 miles to the gallon and
pulling the trailer, no less.
Yeah. It's kind of like she goes from Dr. Jekyll to Mr. Hyde.
Isn't on because he's the one that originally built it.
He assembled it for him, and did a lot of the specifications for it. Yep. Nagel isn't on tonight.
If Brad was on, he could probably tell you a lot about that piece.
Yeah.
And it's probably the fastest cast aluminum Brodex block and cylinder head package out there. None of it's billet. We can't afford billet. I mean, Larry's a working guy, and it's a testament to Brodex quality and a testament to, Proline to, help us put something together that, we've put 50 pounds of boost in the thing in it, and we haven't split the block in half, knock on wood.
Sure.
And that's pretty big. People don't realize that, a lot of the guys that we race against got billet pieces, and they could throw 60 pounds of boost in it. Well, we put a 50-pound tune-up in that thing, and it's running a quarter of a mile. Man, I am cringing like a big dog after it gets past the 1/8 of a mile because I'm waiting for the block to split in half, and knock on wood, it never has.
I remember the first time in Las Vegas, and it was in 14 as well, where we discovered that the MSD boost controller had a 50 PSI failsafe. Yeah. And I have that same cringe feeling observing it. I'm standing there watching him make the pass, and all of a sudden, all we see at the very end of the when he's crossing the line, this 8-foot fireball comes up out the exhaust. And I'm just like, shit, that was it. There it was. And then we get back in there and we're like, what the hell was that? I don't know, but Jesus, did you hear it? Like an explosion. Well, and everything seemed healthy. We go back and look at the logs and figure out that it's got by default had enabled a 50 PSI safety where it would cut the ignition until it dipped below a certain boost in RPM. And we turned that off, and then he ended up going fast, but it was just kind of funny. It didn't really hurt anything that time. So we were lucky.
No, and it's really funny if you're ever at a racetrack to watch Larry work. We went to a no prep, one of the redemption no preps at Evadale Raceway in Texas, and we run a little bit of a different combination with our tire size and not running a bead lock. And we thought we were the cat's meow. We had everything figured out. Well, we go out Friday to run the old school deal and get outrun by a damn small tire car in the big tire class. And it's like,
it happens.
Larry's just humiliated. So, it's like Friday night, it's midnight, and he's like, get it on the projects and, get the 4-link apart.
Hopefully that guy's family was taking video.
Oh, and the guy was a super nice guy. And the best thing about it is the guy went on to win the whole shit and shebang.
Good.
It was great to see, somebody that shouldn't have won win. So, Larry draws up a plan, and we change to a different tire. We change a 4-link. We change rear shocks. We make 5 passes the next day, straight as a string, probably all in the low 14s, and win the no prep race. And it's like, I just marvel at it because I don't understand half of what he's doing, because it's way above my pay grade. It's
totally a tuner's race, man. I'm telling you, yes. His tuning is, he's an open loop tuner guy. He's not doing the drive shaft stuff, the single sensor, perfect pass type stuff like you get with an MSD grid or 7531s, which works awesome in some cases, but at that power level, wears the engine out a lot quicker. And he told me he's still, just a couple weeks ago, he said he's still just open loop tuning that, kind of feeling his way down the track and watching what other people are doing. He's gotten really good at it.
We played with the traction control when we went up to Pacific Junction, ran our very first ever no prep, and we made 4 passes, racing on the dots. And that year when we sent the motor back to get it freshened, it took them an hour and a half to get the dampener off of it.
Right.
Crankshaft was all tore up. The rod bearings looked terrible. And it's like, ooh, that was 4 passes, running on the dots. Shit, we can't afford to do that.
Nope.
So, he throws a tune-up in it that he thinks will get it down the racetrack and, manipulates the timing and the boost curve that's in it. And, we don't run a traction control, we would if we could afford to, replace parts, but, we had a great year this year. We won a ton of money, but still he's like, if we hurt this motor, we're done, so we can't afford to hurt parts. And I think that's another testament that we can go fast, not tear things up. And so many people want to laugh at the no prep deal because it's a crash fest. Well, power management is no different on a no prep than it is on a prepped racetrack.
Right. That's long been my argument. And also statistically, just as an observer, by entry, I hate to say it, the prep track races are doing about the same as, crashes per entry. So just,
the cool thing, we went to Tucson. I didn't go, but I spent a couple of Saturdays there turning the short bed into a long bed. And, Larry leaves the shop and drives all the way to Tucson by himself. And he thinks he's got a couple of buddies that live in Phoenix that'll come down and help him. But, he was willing to go out there alone, with nobody to help him. And the guys did show up and they helped him. And, he got to race with the movie stars because they had a problem with the truck was built, basically as a 115-inch wheelbase truck, because that's a common wheelbase for, a pro mod. And that's what Larry built the wheelbase for. It allowed him to get everything under the hood. It allowed him not to have to put the motor in the driver's compartment. Had he done an extended cab, and everybody came out with this rule about, got to be plus or minus 2 inches on the wheelbase. Well, anybody that kind of understands leverage realizes that a 99-inch wheelbase car is going to transfer weight a whole hell of a lot faster than a 115-inch wheelbase car. So on a no prep, you'd want a short car, not a long car. So, 55 Chevy or a 62 Impala, pretty advantageous to have one of those in a no prep. But they had this rule where we had to be plus or minus 2 inches. So Larry put a 1.5-foot extension on the bed and made the short bed a long bed. The long bed wheelbase is 117. We're 115. So now we're legal. Of course, everybody screamed about, hey, it's an altered wheelbase because look how far forward the rear end is. Well, the nice thing about Larry is he's built race cars for the last 20 years, and he knows that all the 97 style Firebirds, Probes, Oldsmobiles, all of them have the rear end shoved 4 inches forward, and then they add 4 inches to the front end to extend the front end so that the rear tires aren't going up through the hatchback or through the rear window. You couldn't put a tub in one with the tire, in the stock location. So in all reality, those cars have an altered wheelbase too. So they're like, oh, if you're not going to let Larry run because of an altered wheelbase, then half your field can't race either, whether it was a Probe or an Oldsmobile, or a Firebird. So they were pretty receptive of him being out there, and he went out there and got down to 4 cars, and Kai Kelly made a better pass getting down a crappy racetrack than he did, and he got invited to the next one. So he's going to be on his way to San Antonio sometime this week and go run another one. And they're paying $40,000 to win. So
that's the other thing is the money they're paying at these events. It makes quite the draw. And obviously spectator attendance still really good at these.
Jim Hughes, who owns Tucson's racetrack, had never had that many people at a race since he, took over the racetrack. He said that was the largest crowd by probably 50% that he had ever had. Like them guys or dislike them guys, the guys on the Discovery Channel have brought a renewed vigor to our industry. And, being in this industry, I see it. The amount of people that are building 1,500 horsepower street cars, I'm not
it's
saying
impressive.
That there's,
Yeah.
Go to
Love
drag
them or hate
week.
them, they made it cool to have a hot rod again.
Absolutely. And there's so many people that when you go to these racetracks, they're like, well, we were never a fan of drag racing, but this show was kind of cool, because they got personalities and they're not going, oh yeah, he's my competitor, but he's my buddy and I love him and he doesn't do anything wrong, and that's the way the politically correct crap is that we have on TV at most motorsports functions, across the United States. These guys are, in my opinion, they're real. They don't like somebody, they tell them.
Yeah, it's this. I was having this conversation with some friends at work, and it's the same reason that I enjoy watching the UFC. I like watching the pre-show. I like watching the smack talk. I'm going to take your head off. I'm going to make you tap. I enjoy the build up to a good fight. I also enjoy the build up to a good race. Some of it's hammed up on TV. Whatever, it is what it is. But I think all in all, it is good for the sport.
And I love the people that say that it's fixed. I've been to a chemo a couple of times.
Yep.
And I've watched them. And, I guess the people that don't like Street Outlaws must think these guys are freaking superstar amazing people, because I don't know how you can give a race up by a few thousands. I don't know too many guys that are going to invest that much money and be that competitive and are going to, let somebody tell them whether they're going to win or lose. I've seen these guys bounce off the curb. I've seen these guys run off the road. There may be some scripted drama crap, but the racing's real.
Yeah, how can you script? Hey, look, we're gonna need you to take your low 4-second 1/8 mile car, and I want you to pedal it like 3 times. Really make it dramatic. Like, you can't do that.
No. I'm sure when they told Chief that he needed to crash, and they needed to get that kid to run into him and crash him, they probably all kind of scratched their heads about, that may not be the best idea, but
yeah, we really need you to sell it, Chief. Okay.
Yeah. So in all reality, the no prep stuff, obviously that's what we like to do. The drag radial stuff, Larry swears he'd never put a go-kart tire on his truck, so that probably rules us out from ever doing that. But he respects what those guys do on that tire. But it becomes a wallet measuring contest, and we don't have that kind of wallet. None of those guys that are, maybe 1 or 2 guys that are somewhat successful in that arena, don't have huge budgets, but you look at the majority of them guys and, good for them. They have the jobs, the businesses to be able to go spend that money. Hey, I'm not faulting them at, that at all, but we can't do it just because we don't have that kind of budget.
I think when you and Larry decided to go no prep, I'll be honest, the first time I saw Larry in the truck on as listed as attendance for, I'm not sure which one of the first race it was, but I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. They paid, the King of Drag Week a few grand to show up. But, here we are a few years later and you guys are still out there killing it. I think it's awesome. I was huge fan just based on the Drag Week record, and to see him going out there Rocky Mountain Race Week and the no prep stuff and just, campaigning the shit out of this truck. It's awesome.
Well, and the thing that kind of got overshadowed was we went to Topeka a couple years ago and bracket raced the damn thing in Top Sportsman, and
That was so awesome.
we're the first
that was my
first turbo car to win a Top Sportsman race. We were the fastest ever Top Sportsman car. I think somebody's gone faster now, but he put a 620 tune-up in the thing, and it ran like a bracket car.
And what was drove it there.
What was funny is we go to run the final, and it's actually the next day because it got late and dewy, and they waited till the next day, and the guy we're racing is, he's a pretty successful Top Sportsman racer, and he's talking about, what his weather station said and which way the wind's blowing, and, him and his kid got their calculators out and their computers out, and they're figuring out what to dial, and he walks over and he, introduces himself to Larry, and we, all shake hands, and he's like, what are you going to dial? Because we all cross over on each other. We did have a delay box in it. And Larry looked at me and I looked at Larry, and he goes, 616 is a pretty memorable number for us because that was how fast we went at drag week. So he's like, Jeff, throw her on a 616. Okay. We don't have a weather channel or a weather station. We didn't even look at the flag, and damned if, the guy killed Larry on the tree and never looked back and broke out, but we went 616 with a 7.
Outstanding.
And won a national event with something that, can drive down the street. So, that's one of the accolades that, Larry has accomplished so much, but he doesn't run around on social media telling everybody what a badass he is. He just lets his record speak for himself.
Right on.
And I think that's what's kind of cool, that he doesn't brag. And maybe that's why he doesn't have 100,000 people on Facebook following him, or why, he's not, always talked about, anytime drag week's talked about, that he's not considered the star. Nobody won that damn event 5 years in a row except him.
Yeah. No, that's so true. And he's just a humble, laid back guy, really neat guy. But no, very cool. No, that's neat to hear, man. I've got the inside scoop.
No, and I mean that's what we're going to do the rest of the year. Is we're going to try to run Rocky Mountain Race Week, do as much no prep racing as we can, and run drag week. Last year we went to Australia and got to spend 2 weeks over there with the Chevy 2 and the truck. That was a once in a lifetime deal.
Yeah, the pictures coming back from that were outstanding.
Kangaroos. I spent $400 in 2 weeks going to Australia, and that was on feeding my fat butt and buying beer. They covered everything else. So some of the things you get to do with Larry, just because of who he is and the opportunities that are presented to you. I've had some pretty cool racing luck, and I've fielded some cars in the circle track world for some really famous people. But, this drag racing thing, I never got to go to Australia circle track racing.
Right, right.
It was the drag racing side.
Awesome.
So
very cool. Hey, man, we got to be wearing you out. And this is a good time to take a breath and wrap it up. I don't any of the guys here got any remaining questions before we...
Well, I just got to say, Scott, you've been killing it with the photos tonight, because every time I look up, it's another Throttles photo rolling by. I just love it.
That's my phone pictures from the last couple of years.
I got to get some of those photos from you. Some of those are really good.
Oh, yeah. There's good stuff in there. I need to put titles on them and subtitles and explain what they are. Maybe later. But
no, anybody that's listening, if you ever have fuel system questions, feel free to call Aeromotive. I'm on Facebook. Shoot me an instant message. I'll answer it when I can. I travel a little bit, and obviously my job priorities there, sometimes get me carried away for a week or two. But feel free, if you know my cell phone number, call me. We're all in this deal, to try and eke out a living doing something that we enjoy doing. So,
and that's you guys' website is at www.aeromotiveinc.com. Aeromotiveinc.com.
Correct.
Yeah,
and
check that out.
We're going to have some cool stuff on our website, hopefully a little bit later this year, where we're going to have a fuel system planner that will basically be drop down, menus, how much power you're going to make, what fuel you're going to use, continuous duty, what's the power adder, and basically it will walk you through every component you need to build a fuel system, from pump to line size to filters to regulators, and just take so much of the guessing out, because there's so many internet experts out there that don't have a clue. And it gets, racing's expensive enough. The worst thing that I hate hearing is where a guy got bad advice, bought $1,000 worth of stuff, and it won't perform the way it should perform, and now he has to turn around and spend $1,500 on the right stuff. Okay, this feels way too expensive to begin with. We can't grow this industry. We can't keep people, enthused about the automotive world if we're charging them double for everything. So we feel if we can build a tool on our website that allows you to come there and tell us some basic things, and it will give you, a real live fuel system, everything you need from the tank, to the regulator, to the rails, to the line size, filters, everything, and take the guesswork out of it. And I think it'll be a good, tuning sale for the shops out there. They'll be able to get on the laptop and say, well, here's what you need. And here's what it costs for me, and, I can have it in a day, so I think that'll help our business tremendously. And it's just another way we differentiate ourselves from our competitors. We're always trying to think outside the box, how to make the consumer experience that much better, because without the consumer having a good experience, none of us are going to have a job.
Outstanding. That's the way to do it. Once again, huge thanks to Jeff Stacy from Aeromotive. Check him out at aeromotiveinc.com. Very cool to have him on here. So, that being said, let's see. We got class coming up this weekend at Houston, so there's just a couple of seats left for that. If anybody's interested, just hit us up at RealTuners.com or message me, RealTuners LLC, on Facebook. 2 more weeks after that, we got a class coming up. Let's see. It's going to be in Melbourne, Florida. Check that out. That's there's still like 6 or 7 seats left, I think, for that one. But anyway, that's about all we got going on. Thanks for all the guys tonight for chiming in and helping us out. Thanks again to Jeff Stacy from Aeromotive. And thanks to all you guys for listening live. We'll have the replay of this posted up on the podcast sites very shortly in the next couple of hours. Thanks, everybody, and take care.